Let's work Africa-Majeur. And as a country and as a continent at large, we continue to fight various social challenges. And today we delve into suicide. To give us a better insight, our expert on this platform is Mr. Lubanda Hamwendo, a clinical psychiatrist. To kickstart our program, we first want to find out the prevalence of this particular vice in the country. Mr. Hamwendo, yes. How prevalent is suicide in Zambia so far?
Okay, suicide has been on the rise over the last 10 years, especially in middle-income countries like Zambia. So obviously, 79% of the suicide rates across the world take place in middle-income countries like Zambia. So over the past few years, we've seen an increase in suicide. So it's the 10th cause of death in Zambia currently, and the prevalence stands at 6%. Then obviously, if we were to look at the ratios of people who've died as a result of suicide, we find that we have 3.5 females in a population of 10,000, in a population of 10,000. Then we have 8.8 males in a population of 10,000 as well. So over the past few years, especially over the past 5 years, would say that we're seeing an increase in the number of suicidal cases in Zambia.
Okay, so what are the major causes of the vice?
So obviously the causes are a lot. So we would have to look at the biological causes, not only biological causes, we would have to look at the psychological causes of suicide and also the sociological causes. If I was to start from the biological causes, we were looking at the genetic makeup of an individual. We're also looking at diseases. So let's say people who have chronic illnesses. These chronic illnesses which become terminal at the end of the day. We're talking about HIV, COVID-19. Probably we heard of someone who committed suicide. At least 2 people committed suicide this year because of being diagnosed with suicide. So we're looking at people who have underlying medical conditions, not only underlying medical conditions, but also underlying mental health conditions. We have seen that 95% of people who are depressed who have suicidal ideas, and over 60% of people who are depressed who at least try to commit suicide. So not only that, we also have other general psychiatric conditions. We have bipolar mood disorders, we have schizophrenia, and many other things. So mostly people who have these conditions, psychiatric conditions, we see that they end up committing suicide after being discharged from the hospital. So these are people who find it very hard to integrate in societies. Not only that, we also have psychological causes. Psychological causes might be as a result of, again, we talk about depression and low mood. Someone who has persistent, exaggerated low moods might end up committing suicide. We were talking about people who do not have support groups. They don't have confiding relationships. And these are people who might end up committing suicide. We're talking about people who have gone through trauma. Could be sexual trauma, could be physical trauma. We're also talking about there's also a new term, financial trauma, mostly in women. So these are people who might end up committing suicide. Then we also have sociological causes. Retrenchment from work, for example, might lead to suicide. A person who's been divorced might actually become suicidal and might commit suicide. So those are a few things of the many causes of suicide that we have. Then probably something that we forget to mention is the use of drugs as well. In practice, I've seen people who, for example, a person abusing heroin because of the withdrawal symptoms that they have, because they're unbearable, they end up committing suicide. And things like alcohol, if a person obviously engages in binge drinking and they spend a lot of money and that money was needed for something else, they might actually, because of a responsibility that they might have afterwards, they might end up committing suicide. So they're quite numerous.
Okay.
Yeah.
So considering those factors and maybe many other factors that we may not have talked about just now, is there a particular age group that is more that falls prey more often to the vice compared to another?
Statistically, when we look at the age groups, we see that most of these people who are committing suicide are between the ages of 15 to 29. Yeah, but we also find suicide across people who are above the age of 35. But a majority of people who commit suicide are young adults and adolescents. Okay. Yeah.
How proactive can you say we are as a country at our community levels where fighting the scourge is concerned?
Not very active, I think, but we were heading somewhere. There's been a lot of talk on mental illnesses and also suicide, which this is a sign of proactiveness as a country and also as institutions. But suicide is obviously something that we need to constantly talk about, because even as we see an increase in the educational status of individuals, which is also similar to the US, which has a lot of suicide cases. This is something that that will not obviously get rid of overnight. It's something that we will need to keep talking about, and a few years from now, probably 5 years from now, we'll be somewhere as a country, because we're seeing a lot of infrastructure being built. We're seeing a lot of institutions coming up, a lot of organizations coming up, and mental health services are being decentralized now. So we are finding mental health services not only at places like Chainama, but we're also finding them in places like clinics and general hospitals, so which is very good. So we're proactive as a country and soon as communities.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as an expert and as an institution,
yeah,
do you have any testimonies, for example, where you successfully deterred a person or persons from committing suicide?
Okay. My work obviously has to do with that, so I think I have a few stories of people who were at the verge of committing suicide, but after going through aggressive counseling, and some who needed pharmacotherapy. By that I mean some people who needed medication, could be antidepressants or antipsychotics, were able to just get rid of the suicidal ideas, and now they're living fulfilled lives. So quite numerous stories I have. Yeah.
So apart from maybe psychosocial institutions or psychiatry,
yeah,
institutions, perhaps like this one, is there anything that you individually feel can be done to, make it more efficient, to fight the scourge more efficiently by society at large?
Okay. When you look at the statistics and religiously, when you look at them from a religious point of view, we actually find to say more Christians commit suicide, and these Christians are from Protestant churches, and we have a lot of Protestant churches now, Pentecostal churches in Zambia. So that's where most of the suicide cases are in. So, but obviously talking about suicide in churches is a taboo. It's considered a taboo because people who commit suicide are seen as people who have a weak faith, or people who are emotionally weak. So I feel, TV stations and radio stations are doing the best that they can, but the churches, I feel, are not doing enough. It's rare that you'd find the church coming to you, reaching out to you to say, okay, come and talk to our congregants about suicide. Suicide is something that we find in the Bible, from people who have committed suicide in the Bible, so it's not something that is new. But I feel this is something that we should talk about more often in churches, not only in churches but also as families, because people who commit suicide mostly are people who have made it known to family members and friends. These are people who often tell you to say, when you argue, they talk about killing themselves or they talk about death, but we just shrug it off. So I feel we should do more as churches, not only as churches but also as families. If we could even drive it further, probably as institutions, the same way that we have sports day in various companies. I feel we should also have days that are simply tailor-made for things to do with mental health, because most of the workers are suffering with mental health problems and they're not able to come out in the open, and the next thing that you probably find is someone committed suicide. So we should do more as institutions and as a country.
Okay, so I want to get a connection, if there is any, the psychological and the religious part. You just mentioned Protestant churches having the highest cases of suicide. What's the psychological connection? What is there any known cause of why these people find themselves committing suicide?
Unfortunately, I didn't go that far, but probably if from practice, if I was to think about it, I think most of the times a few people that I've met who were suicidal are people who probably had, because of their religious background, they had done something that they felt was a great sin. And if you couple it with these other problems that they're going through, they feel probably it would be better to terminate their own life. So yeah, there's a strong connection between being highly religious and suicide because of sin and the guilt that comes after sin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there we have it. We continue learning, we continue being informed, and we've learned one or two things about suicide from the clinical psychiatrist himself, Mr. Lwanda Hamwendo. Let's Wake Africa. We not have a choice.